The summer night in Dallas was thick with heat, the kind that clings to your skin even after the sun has long disappeared. From the rooftop of the boutique hotel downtown, I could see the city lights sprawled out endlessly, shimmering like jewels scattered across black velvet. Music from the bar below drifted up, mellow and low, mixing with the faint hum of traffic far beneath us. I had been invited to this rooftop lounge by my friend Rachel, who swore it was the perfect spot for cocktails and conversation. I wasn't much of a party girl, but something about that night made me feel like anything could happen. Rachel disappeared after a few minutes, chatting up some group of people she'd met before, leaving me leaning against the railing with my drink in hand. That was when I noticed them. Two men standing a few feet away, laughing quietly between themselves. They weren't the loud, showy type that usually dominated places like this. Instead, there was a calm presence about them, as if they belonged to the night itself. One of them, tall with dark brown hair and a crisp button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves, caught my eye first. His name, as I later learned, was Daniel. The other man, slightly shorter with sandy blonde hair and a rugged kind of handsomeness, was named Chris. I wasn't sure if they noticed me staring until Daniel raised his glass slightly in my direction, a small smile tugging at his lips. Embarrassed, I looked away, but seconds later, Chris walked over. "You look like you could use better company than your phone," he said lightly, nodding toward the device I was absent-mindedly scrolling. His voice was low, confident without being arrogant. I laughed nervously and slipped my phone into my purse. "Guilty," I admitted. "My friend abandoned me." "Lucky for us," he replied, motioning for me to join them. Something in me hesitated. I was married, after all. My husband, David, had been working late shifts for months, and while our marriage wasn't falling apart, it had certainly lost its spark. I told myself it was harmless, just a conversation, just some company on a summer night. Nothing more. So I followed Chris over to where Daniel stood, and soon I was drawn into their world. Daniel was quieter than Chris, but when he spoke, it carried weight. He asked thoughtful questions, listened intently, and studied me with eyes that seemed to see more than I was comfortable revealing. Chris, on the other hand, kept things light and playful, throwing in jokes that made me laugh harder than I had in months. Together, they balanced each other perfectly, and I found myself at ease in a way I hadn't felt in years. Hours passed without me realizing it. The rooftop grew quieter as the crowd thinned, but the three of us lingered, sitting closer now, sharing stories about life, regrets, and dreams. Chris told me about his work in construction, how he loved building things with his hands, how tangible it felt to create something out of nothing. Daniel confessed he was a writer, though he rarely let anyone read his work. They asked me about my life, and for the first time, I admitted aloud that I felt trapped, not in love exactly, but in routine. My marriage had become a cycle of work, silence, and sleep, and somewhere along the way, I had stopped feeling like myself. Daniel didn't say much in response, but the look he gave me was almost dangerous in its intensity. Chris reached over and touched my hand lightly, a gesture so subtle yet electric that it sent a shiver through me. I should have pulled away, reminded myself of my vows, of David waiting at home. But I didn't. I let it linger. When the bartender announced last call, Chris leaned in with a mischievous grin. "The night doesn't have to end just yet," he whispered. Daniel stood, offering me his hand, and without thinking too much about consequences, I took it. We left the rooftop together, descending into the warm Dallas night. The streets were alive even past midnight, but the three of us found ourselves wandering away from the noise, toward quieter blocks where the streetlights flickered and the air felt heavy with possibility. I remember laughing too loud at something Chris said, the sound bouncing off brick walls. Daniel walked close beside me, his hand brushing against mine as though testing the waters. I didn't stop him. Eventually, we stumbled upon another building, this one with a stairwell leading up to a locked gate. Chris, ever bold, found a way in, and soon we were climbing flight after flight until we reached another rooftop, this one deserted, raw, and open to the night sky. From up there, Dallas looked infinite. The stars above fought to shine through the haze of city lights, and the air was thick with the smell of asphalt cooling after a hot day. We sat at the edge, legs dangling over, passing around a bottle of whiskey Chris had somehow produced from his jacket. The city felt like it belonged to us alone, a private world suspended between earth and sky. I remember thinking how surreal it all was. Two strangers who felt like they'd been in my life forever. And me, a woman who should have been at home but instead was living a night that felt stolen from another life entirely. Daniel told me about the way he saw the world, how rooftops always gave him perspective, made him feel both small and infinite. Chris teased him for being poetic, but even his teasing was affectionate. They were so different, yet together they created a balance that drew me in deeper than I cared to admit. As the night grew later, the whiskey worked its way into my veins, loosening my guard. The conversation slowed, words replaced by glances and silences charged with meaning. At one point, Chris leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine, and whispered, "You're beautiful, you know that?" My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I turned to him, ready to deflect, but before I could speak, Daniel's hand touched the small of my back, grounding me and at the same time unraveling every ounce of resolve I had left. I should have stood, should have said goodnight, should have walked away before things went too far. But I didn't. That rooftop became its own universe, sealed off from rules and responsibilities, where temptation wasn't something to resist but something to embrace. The city lights blurred, the world below forgotten, and all that existed was the heat of the night, the pulse of connection, and the two men who made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. I can't say when the line was officially crossed, only that it happened slowly and all at once, with laughter, whispers, and touches that burned too hot to ignore. It wasn't about betrayal in that moment. It wasn't about my husband or my marriage or the life I had built. It was about desire, about the dangerous thrill of being seen, wanted, and alive. What happened on that rooftop stayed between the three of us, etched into memory like a secret scar. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, I knew nothing would ever feel the same again. I wasn't sure whether to call it regret or awakening. All I knew was that my world had been shaken in ways I couldn't undo. And when I finally left them, walking back into the daylight of Dallas streets, I carried the weight of that night with me, knowing it would haunt me, change me, and remain a part of me forever. The sun was already high by the time I finally dragged myself back to the hotel where Rachel had booked us a room. She was asleep, sprawled across her bed, blissfully unaware of where I had been all night. I quietly slipped into the shower, letting the hot water wash away the sweat, the whiskey, and the lingering scent of Daniel's cologne that clung faintly to my skin. But no matter how long I stood under the water, the night before wouldn't rinse away. It was carved into me, a secret stitched under my skin. When I finally lay down, exhaustion pulled me under, but my dreams were a blur of lights, rooftops, and laughter. By the time I woke again, afternoon sunlight was spilling across the room, and Rachel was shaking my shoulder. "You must have had fun," she teased, eyeing the dark circles under my eyes and the faint smile I couldn't quite erase. I brushed her off with a vague story about staying out late, drinking too much, wandering around the city. She didn't press, but I could tell she suspected more. The ride back home was quiet. My phone buzzed with texts from David asking when I'd be back, reminding me to pick up groceries, telling me the air conditioner had stopped working again. Domestic, ordinary things. My chest tightened as I realized how far away I felt from that life, how distant it seemed from the version of me that had danced with temptation under the Dallas skyline. When I walked through our front door, David was in the kitchen, still in his work clothes. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and asked how my weekend had been. I wanted to tell him everything. The rooftop, the men, the way I had felt like someone new. But of course, I couldn't. Instead, I said it was fun, that Rachel had been her usual wild self, that I was tired but glad to be home. He nodded, poured me a glass of water, and went back to his paperwork. That was the rhythm of our life. Simple, predictable, safe. And yet, in that moment, it felt suffocating. The guilt came in waves. Some days, it was a dull ache in the background of my thoughts. Other days, it roared, accusing and heavy, as I replayed the rooftop night again and again. I would catch myself glancing at David while he talked about work, wondering if he could see it written on me, if he could smell the betrayal like smoke clinging to my skin. But he never said anything. Maybe he didn't notice. Maybe he didn't want to. Weeks passed, and life settled back into its routine. But I couldn't let go. Daniel's intense gaze haunted me in quiet moments. Chris's laughter echoed in my ears when I should have been sleeping. I found myself checking my phone constantly, half hoping, half dreading a message from them. And then one night it came. It was a simple text from an unknown number, thinking about that rooftop. Hope you're doing okay. No name, but I knew it was Daniel. Something about the way it was phrased, measured, careful, yet heavy with meaning, was unmistakable. My hands shook as I typed back. I can't stop thinking about it either. From that moment, the connection reignited. It wasn't daily, but every so often, I'd get a message. Sometimes from Daniel, sometimes from Chris. They didn't pressure me, didn't demand more, but they reminded me that night hadn't been a dream. It had been real, and it had left its mark on them too. I tried to convince myself it was harmless, that these were just words on a screen, ghosts of a memory I could never relive. But late at night, lying beside David while he snored softly, my phone glowing in the dark, those conversations felt more real than the marriage I was clinging to. One evening, after weeks of silence, Daniel sent me a message that stopped my heart. We're back in Dallas next month. Would you want to see us again? I stared at the words for what felt like hours. The rational part of me screamed to ignore it, to delete it, to block the number and pretend none of this had ever happened. But another part, the part that remembered the taste of whiskey on a rooftop, the way my heart had raced under the stars, typed back before I could stop myself. Yes. The days leading up to that reunion were a blur. I told David I was going to visit Rachel again. He didn't question it, he never did. That hurt almost as much as the guilt. He trusted me without hesitation, and here I was, preparing to betray him again. The night of the meeting, I wore a dress I hadn't put on in years, something that made me feel alive, daring. When I walked into the bar where we had agreed to meet, my breath caught. Daniel was there first, leaning against the counter, a quiet storm in his expression. Moments later, Chris arrived, all easy smiles and warmth. Seeing them again was like being pulled back into that private universe where consequences didn't exist, only desire. We didn't go back to the same rooftop. This time, it was a quiet apartment Daniel had rented. Minimalist, almost bare, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Dallas skyline. The moment the door closed behind us, the air shifted. I won't spell out what happened in detail, but I'll say this. It was intense, reckless, unforgettable. And afterward, as I lay tangled between them, the city lights glowing outside, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. When I returned home the next day, David was fixing the leaky sink in the bathroom. He looked up at me with tired eyes and smiled, like he always did. My stomach twisted. I hugged him harder than usual, whispering, "I love you," hoping it would cover the cracks. But love was no longer simple. I loved David for his steadiness, his devotion, his quiet loyalty. Yet I was drawn to Daniel and Chris for everything he wasn't. For the danger, the intensity, the way they made me feel alive. It wasn't fair, not to him, not to me, but it was the truth I couldn't ignore. The weeks that followed were heavy with silence. I found myself staring out windows, thinking about rooftops, wondering if Daniel or Chris were thinking about me too. Sometimes they messaged, sometimes they didn't. But the seed had been planted, and it grew, twisting through every part of my life. I never confessed to David. Maybe that was cowardice, maybe self-preservation. But I did make changes. I suggested we travel more, go out on dates again, try new things. At first, he was surprised, then relieved. Slowly, our marriage found a spark again. Not the same fire as that rooftop night, but something steadier, warmer. Still, there are moments when I close my eyes and I am back in Dallas. I feel the heat of the night air, the weight of Daniel's gaze, the sound of Chris's laughter echoing across rooftops. It's a memory that will never leave me, a scar I carry quietly. People often think infidelity is about not loving your partner. But that's not always true. Sometimes it's about losing yourself and trying desperately to feel alive again. For me, that rooftop night was both a mistake and a revelation. It blew my world apart, yes, but it also forced me to confront what I wanted, who I was, and what I was missing. I don't glorify it. I don't recommend it. But I can't deny that it happened, and that it changed me forever. Dallas will always be a city etched into my soul, not for the skyline, not for the music or the heat, but for one rooftop night with two men that turned my world upside down. And though I live my life now with a smile on my face and my husband's hand in mine, I know part of me will always belong to that night, suspended above the city, where the rules broke down and desire burned brighter than the stars.